guys check out the way Nate Parker handled this cop in this Sambo, and I'll come back with my commentary.
Right about that in this film.
Well, the reality and the root of all of what we're seeing in America right now, in my opinion, is white supremacy. It seems to be a word no one wants to talk about, no one wants to say because of its connections, obviously, through the genocide, of the Jewish community. But white supremacy is a definition of racism. We like to talk about racism in terms of racial hates and hoods and bombing houses in the South, in Mississippi, or whatever that seems convenient, but the reality is the first two definitions of racism are white supremacy and systemic racism, and that is what we're dealing with. So with this film, what I wanted to bring to light is how a good man, a good police officer, someone that loved his family, someone that did not brutalize his children, someone that before he does what he does, you would think that's a cop I would want in my community. He goes out and he is susceptible to a system that is racist and that is a part of a disparity that affects young black people more than anyone else.
Well, there's certainly, when you talk about white supremacy, though, there's a recognition by you, I'm sure, that there are extremely positive and motivated and even-keeled people in white America who don't mean African Americans harm in any way. I mean, would you agree with that notion? You're not talking about everybody, are you?
Listen, black empowerment doesn't mean white hate. White supremacy is something that affects all of us. I remember being young and seeing images of Africa and seeing, young kids with pot bellies and flies walking on their eyes. And I felt a certain way about my blackness through that context. It's all programming. We're all conditioned.
But you didn't let that define you, though, Nate, did you? In other words, you went on to do great things. And while there may be elements of America who have who don't have the best of intentions, it's not something we could say is really all America, can we?
Well, guess what? You're the exception to the rule. I'm the exception to the rule. The Yale brothers that were there are the exception to the rule. We're not the rule. We should not be seen as the barometer. Our President Obama is not the barometer. He's an exception because for every one of us, there's so many dying. There's so many being dealt. A part of the prison industrial complex. A part of a broken education systems. What we're dealing with is real, and as long as we're looking to the exception to let us know where we are as a country, we're never going to change.
And you mentioned earlier, the term white supremacy. So many people would consider that to be an extreme view. Do you consider yourself an extremist?
Absolutely not. It's the definition. If you go and look up the racism in the definition, it says white supremacy, and then it says institutional or systemic racism, and then it says racial hate. The reality is this. Instead of us taking this and saying, all right, is this where we are? Are we in a society that elevates one race above the other? We talk about a racial divide. It's not so much a racial divide as it is a racial hierarchy. The reality is black lives don't carry the same value. And that's evident in the lack of consequences we're seeing across the nation with young men being killed and young women being killed.
But your life has value and our lives have value, and everybody has an opportunity, do they not, to advance themselves. In other words, you have the views that you have, and we respect
really
all
quick.
Views here. Go ahead, go ahead.
Right.
But at the end of the day, but at the end of the day,
you said everyone has the. Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, Nate, please.
No. He said, doesn't everyone have a choice? Doesn't everyone have the right? The reality is, who I am right now as an activist, artist, my trajectory could be cut short at any moment by a poorly conditioned, whether it be an officer or citizen, that their knee-jerk reaction is to pull a trigger and kill me. Maybe I can, before I get killed, yell, hey, I'm an actor, don't shoot me, I'm not like everyone else. Maybe that would help me. But in reality, we don't often get that chance.
Nat, isn't that unfair to the police? I've known Pat Brosnan for a long time. I've done work with Pat Brosnan. He's here on set. I want him to address that because certainly, we could argue that there's aggressive policing in African-American communities,
We're not saying the same
communities.
thing.
But what are we saying? I mean, your life can change, our lives can change, but we had Yale students here who are making a difference, who are African-American men.
But what makes Yale Right, but what makes Yale different from Howard, or makes Yale different from any other school? The reality is, if you have black skin or you have brown skin in this country, you are at a disadvantage when it comes to your life being valued.
You could be at a disadvantage, right? You could be at a disadvantage,
okay, you know what I mean?
Nate, but at the end of the day, it's up to us, right? It's up to the individual wherever you go. You could go to Howard, you could go to Yale, you could go to Brockwood, you could go to any college you want to, but we have a choice to move forward, to empower ourselves, to take responsibility, and not just say white supremacy. The white man's holding us down. There's nothing we can do. Everyone has an individual choice.
Brother, guess what? Whether you know it or not, you are an exception to the rule. Even though you may not accept that, but for every one of you that made it to where you are in journalism even, there's so many that are on the other end of that disparity that haven't made it to where you are. I know that. You asked me about myself personally. I'm from Norfolk, Virginia. I come from a project called Tidewater Park, right? I'm one of the very few that can stand in front of you and say, I've had success in my life, whether it be in the arts, whether it be financial, or whatever. But when I go back and see, I don't see a bunch of people with a choice to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, that have equal employment opportunities, that have equal education opportunities, that aren't being touched by the criminal justice system in a negative way almost every day of their lives.
Nat, just one thing, and I want to spin over to Pat, because I want Pat to address this. I grew up in the Bronx. I was raised in the Bronx. I wasn't raised with privilege. I ran around with people in my neighborhood from the community, and the reality is I had choices when I was growing up with who to hang out with, who not to hang out with, what to do, what not to do, and so, you know, I was susceptible to the same experiences.
But Joey, I think to Nate's point, the bottom line is the statistics do point out that the race, the color of your skin does matter.
Absolutely.
It does matter.
Right.
And in a sense, when you look at least at the statistics between when you have confrontations between police and black men, by and large, black men end up at the short end of the stick. And I think, you know, Pat Brosnan, I want to bring you in because you are a former NYPD detective. The stats clearly show that black men are at a much higher rate killed by white police officers than white victims.
Well, you know, Sonny, that's an easy one for me to counter with other incontrovertible facts as it relates to statistics. What I'd rather do is, if you don't mind, I'd like to address two things. First of all, now I know why I like Joey. I also was born and raised in the Bronx. Lived there for 34 years. We'll talk about that separately. But so now I kind of get it. But the thing is, you know, Nate's assessment and his fear of a knee-jerk reaction by a police officer of shooting him for no reason is not based in fact. And again, I'm not going to mire this conversation. Well, I'll tell you why. Because if you look right now, well, allow me, Nate. If you look at the Garner, the facts as it relates to the Garner decision in the grand jury, and the facts as it relates to the Michael Brown decision in the grand jury, what drives that whole decision-making process was two words. It's a noun, it's an adjective. It's bad decisions. They made bad decisions. And what the decisions were, Sonny, where they took an unfolding situation with a police officer and they failed to comply with a lawful order and a lawful arrest. And what happened was it became resisting arrest. So now you have two nouns. You have larceny. That wasn't a strong-arm robbery. With Brown, that was a low-level robbery. It was a larceny. He would have been out. And Lucy's, that would have been a fine.
Aren't you blaming the victim, though? Do the officers not have any place here? Are you telling me and our viewers and everyone here that race did not play a part at all in some of the decisions, perhaps, that the officers were making? The escalation of force that we saw that we didn't have to see? I'm being wrapped in my ear, but I think this is so important. Okay. You must concede, Pat, that there are white kids that make the same kinds of mistakes that Michael Brown made, same kinds of mistakes that Eric Garner made, but they are still alive.
I can't concede on that, Sonny, without looking at all the facts. I'll give you this. There's one incontrovertible fact on this. Had they complied, they would have been fined. They'd both be alive today. They made this decision. It was a bad decision.
But there are
the underlying
kids in white communities making just as many bad decisions, but that's not where our police choose to enforce the laws. The same laws apply to everyone in the abstract, but in practice, you see police officers enforcing in predominantly minority communities, and that's why we see disproportionately more black people being incarcerated and being ultimately killed in police confrontations.
But Dan, you're taking it in a vacuum. There are whites that are killed by the cops who are in similar situations
not as many.
Where they don't comply. But
not as many. Nate Parker, I want to bring you back in. What are your final thoughts?
Well, I think Pat Bronson's inability to acknowledge and recognized, vetted, and researched statistics regarding racism in America is very telling of where we are as a country. If there's no honest confrontation about where we are, there can be no healing. If there's no healing, then we can't change. You know, we
Pat,
hear this
can you
buzzword
respond
about
to that?
change.
Nate,
You know, we can't change if we don't have honest confrontation.
Just
absolutely, Nate. Just real quick, if you wouldn't mind, would you concede?
Sure.
Would you concede that if Eric Garner and Michael Brown had simply complied with a lawful arrest, simply said, "Hey, bro, you got me," put their hands behind their back, that two things would have happened? Just they wouldn't have died. They wouldn't have died. No, it's a run-on sentence, Nate. I'm not done. They wouldn't have died. And ironically, they both would be free because they were fined.
How would you know that?
One at a time.
How could you know they would be alive?
Because
how could you know that?
Their decision. No.
How could you know? You weren't there. I went to Ferguson. I talked to the citizens. How could you know yourself?
Now, if you listen to the Sambo, you can tell that he was completely twisting Nate Parker's words. He was basically trying to allude to the fact that black folks have we don't give a damn type of attitude, or we want to blame everything on the white man, or, you know, just basically rhetoric bullshit that was coming out of his mouth. And what Nate Parker was trying to school this Sambo on was the fact that, yeah, we all have decisions. Every day when we wake up, we have a decision whether we want to, you know, go to the gym or go to work, take care of our responsibilities, or do we want to sit on our ass? Do we want to go outside and commit a crime, etc., etc.? We all have choices. It doesn't matter whether you're living in poverty or whether you're a privileged person. We all have decisions every single day. But his point is that the same opportunities that are given to people that are not of color are not given to people who are of color, especially in primarily black folks. And what he was saying was that, yeah, you might have somebody who, you know, be in a position as, you know, the position he was in, or you might get to college, or at the position where Nate Parker is at, very successful. But that does not mean that we don't live in a system of white supremacy that tries to keep black folks as a permanent underclass. Now, you know, me prime example. I'm somebody, I come from a single parent household. I've lived in the projects, both West Coast and East Coast. I was somebody who came from the bottom, got myself to college, has been successful in my career. Do I live in the projects now? Absolutely not. I've been able to sustain a certain amount of income where I don't have to live in those conditions. But at the same time, I don't forget where I come from. I don't forget that we do live in a system that tries to keep blacks as a permanent underclass, lacks resources within certain communities, lacks employment, lacks certain opportunities. So us as blacks who have gotten to the next level, quote unquote, made it out, you have to understand that there are still a group of people who don't have the advantages that you have, don't live in your conditions. So at the same time, we have to have all those black folks who have made it out of those conditions have to reach a hand back, pull other brothers and sisters up, say, hey, you know, you don't have to do that, or navigate yourself through this to get to this level. And that's part of the reason why, you know, I come out here and I do these videos to, you know, spread the knowledge, to get people thinking. Because I think that, you know, with black folks, a lot of times, because of the conditions we live in, because of the day-to-day stress, because of the things that we see, a lot of times some of us are very impulsive, or we can be emotional at times without actually thinking and saying, you know what, let me sit back and let me observe the opposition and figure out how to navigate through this system in order to create a better life for myself. But there's always people like, you know, this Sambo on here, or a Stephen A. Smith, or a Charles Barkley, or Stacey Dash, who feel like because they made it to a certain situation in their life, or a certain status, that these situations do not exist. The black folks who might be still living in poverty, or black folks who, you know, have a hard time getting on their feet or creating opportunity for themselves, they're so-called lazy, or they quote-unquote haven't pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. Then you got the cop over here basically protecting his ass. You got the white guy next to him looking like Forrest Gump. He didn't know what to say. You know, I don't know if you guys peeped that out, but he was looking back and forth. He was looking at the black guy, and he was looking at the cop like, oh my God, I don't know what to say in this situation. But the cop was basically protecting his ass, protecting his force, and that's the reason why we have police brutality, or we have, bad police conduct, because we have officers out here who do not want to take the responsibility and say, hey, you know what? We do have a problem with excessive force. We do have a problem with prejudgment. We do have a problem with officers bringing their upbringing, their racist upbringing to the work field, which is projecting out in their day-to-day ability to do their job. These are things that people are not talking about and people don't want to acknowledge. And that's why we have these issues out here. But, you know, I want to show everybody this this segment of Nate Parker, because, you know, he really said what needed to be said. I'm glad he didn't sugarcoat anything, because a lot of times when, certain entertainers have movies coming up or projects, you know, they want to stay on a straight and narrow line. They don't want to say what really is going on and speak the truth. And he did that. That's why I got a lot of respect for Nate Parker. And, you know, I'm definitely going to check out the upcoming film he's a part of, the Nat Turner film. And I hope you guys do too. But you guys give me your feedback if you want.